Anyone familiar with RuneScape knows when players are upset with an update, they protest to get it changed. In this mini-series, we're covering all of the notable riots. Today we're taking a journey through the last 4 classic riots. In the last video, we explored how Reign of Terror managed to sabotage RuneScape's first riot. Well, less than a month after that, on January 2nd, 2007, players came together again in what has become known as the Rule 7 riot. They did this because you didn't hit the like button. I'm just kidding, but this video is sponsored by our merch store. If you want to get yourself a pressure casted statue, we have lots made and ready to go. Along with that, we're wrapping up Jad pre-orders and Vorkath pre-orders. Both of those will be out the door by the end of the month. Check it out, link is in the description. So, January 2nd, 2007, the Rule 7 riot. Hey, check that date. 2007. Old school RuneScape is based on the 2007 version of RuneScape. I'd bet my hat and win about 80% of the time that you use RuneLite to play the game. They were using third-party clients back then too. SwiftSwitch was the biggest. Revolutionary for the time, they had a world switcher among many other utilities. A huge convenience, and this is where the client derived its name. It's also what caused this riot. Like RuneLite, players flocked in big numbers to SwiftSwitch because of the quality of life features it provided. Jagex, due to 2 influences, decided to make an update to Rule 7 to ban the use of third-party clients. Influence number 1. A small group of vocal players had convinced Jagex that SwiftSwitch was a cheat client, that players should not be able to switch worlds on RuneScape without navigating all the way back to the homepage and then going through a series of links. Influence number 2. Jagex was concerned about the safety of third-party clients. They had no control over preventing malware being put into them to hack RuneScape accounts en masse. And so they decided to update Rule 7 to disallow the use of third-party clients. Players on the 2nd of January went nuts. Players argued this rule change because SwiftSwitch fundamentally didn't encompass any of the macroing features that Rule 7 originally set out to disallow. It didn't play the game for you. It wasn't a bot. Really, this riot only happened because players loved the quality of life features so much that they weren't willing to lose them. And so they gathered on World 27 at Falador, activating the Retribution Prayer and shouting "Save SS." They were pleading to Jagex to reverse this change because they didn't want to be banned for using a client that they felt had no real harm to the game and actually only made it more enjoyable. For a second time, Jagex decided to listen to the protesters. In response to this riot, they actually reverted their stance on this rule. The official messaging was that third-party clients would be re-allowed, but they are strongly discouraged because of the possibility of malware. Not only did this further enforce the idea that rioting on RuneScape could lead to real change, but it also established Falador as the main location for rioters to meet. This was the first riot in RuneScape that was established at Falador, likely due to the fact that Falador was a common trading ground back in 2006. As you'll see in the future riots, this becomes a staple. Nearly an entire year later, on December 10th, 2007, the second staple of riots, that is World 66, would be established. This is the worst and biggest riot to have ever occurred in RuneScape's history. It started in December but didn't end until early January. That's nearly a month. We're talking about the Pay to PK riot, also known as the Free Trade riot. This was incited by 2 updates. The first was the removal of Wilderness, and then later in January, the removal of Free Trade. It all started on the 10th of December. Jagex made an update to remove the Wilderness and replace it with a minigame known as Bounty Hunter. The players were not happy. You could no longer freely pick who you wanted to kill in the Wilderness and get their loot for it. Instead, you had to go to the Bounty Hunter minigame, and upon entering it, it would prevent you from bringing in coins, non-combat items, more than 1 piece of armor per combat style, to name a few of the restrictions. The idea was to prevent you from bringing in extra wealth, only the basics needed for PKing. And then once you were actually in the minigame, it would assign a target for you. You couldn't choose who you wanted to kill. See, this was all done in an effort to stop gold sellers from being able to trade gold through the Wilderness. This update is partly responsible as to why the riot lasted nearly a month. They made the change to the wilderness on the 10th of December, but alongside this update, they also announced that they'd be removing free trade in the first week of January. As they put it, you would no longer be able to trade an unbalanced amount of wealth. You could only do trades of values within 3000 GP of each other. You could no longer gift your friend a whip. You could no longer pick up the dragon plate skirt that somebody died with. Like the Wilderness update, this was done in an effort to stop real-world trading. They didn't want gold sellers to be able to function anymore. I'm not sure why they decided to space the updates out like this, but nevertheless it gave a time window for players to rage and protest against the change that was just made to the Wilderness and the upcoming removal of free trade. And that's exactly what they did, but it didn't start in Falador on World 66. Instead, it started on World 18 at Edgeville Bank. See, Mod Hasmo logged in after the update. He was greeted by PKers that were upset. He asked them, before you make up your minds, you should try the Bounty Hunter update, but the players weren't having it. Instead, they cussed profanities at Hasmo, told him that nobody liked the Bounty Hunter update, and they were encouraging other players to follow them because they were starting a PK riot. Over the next many hours, riots of varying sizes started in different locations on various worlds. People were protesting at the party room, at the White Knight's castle, at Varrock Square, and basically every main city bank. Cannons were set up, junk was dropped on the ground, people were killing themselves on purpose to spawn gravestones all around the map. But eventually the riot centralized on World 66 at Falador Square. People were spamming, "We pay, we say. No kills, no bills. We pay to PK." Players turned on their retribution prayer as they had done in other riots. And like past riots, there was also a small group of opposing players that were for the changes. They were spamming support Jagex, read the diary. The diary referring to the development diary in which Jagex had posted why they are making these changes. They weren't heard by many. And one thing you'll notice from all of these screenshots is the people wearing pink skirts. This became the unofficial riot outfit, and that's because a large portion of the riot started in Varrock Square, where pink skirts are sold at the clothing shop. Players would later buy them and bring them to Falador, trading them to other rioters there and selling them to the general store so they could be bought with ease. The forums were also overrun with disgruntled players. Jagex had made 2 sticky threads talking about the updates, and there was over 61,000 combined posts from players on them within the first 2 days. During this time, the forums went offline multiple times because the servers were unable to deal with the amount of players trying to access them so they could complain about these updates. Now, going into January, as the riots dwindled down and eventually ceased, players quit en masse. They were no longer interested in the game with these key features removed. It's estimated that Jagex lost between 30 and 40,000 paying members, which translates into around $3 million USD a year in revenue. So how come this time Jagex decided not to listen to the players and instead go ahead with these updates? At the time, they said it's because they wanted to stop real-world trading in the game, but the company was covering up a larger secret. Both Mod Ash and former Mod Matt K revealed just this past year what was actually going on at the company when they had to make these changes. It turns out that a large number of botters were using stolen credit cards to purchase membership for the game. The victim, upon realizing that their credit card had been stolen, would charge back the membership payments. This resulted in a chargeback fee that Jagex had to eat. Those chargeback fees range between $20 and $100. On top of that, due to the high volume of chargebacks, the credit card companies were threatening to drop Jagex as a customer, and so they had to do something to prevent this. And the solution was to stop real-world trading, as this was mainly funded by bots farming wealth for sale. If they could stop real-world trading, they would also effectively stop the botting. And so Jagex's hand was forced. They couldn't afford to lose the ability to process credit cards for membership that probably made up the majority of their customer base. And so instead, they chose to make these updates and try to swing them in a positive light. It didn't work. 6 months later, on the 4th of June 2008, this riot would happen all over again on the 6-month anniversary. Again, they were unable to make any changes to satisfy the players. The 5th and final classic riot occurred on June 24th of 2010. A small handful of players became overnight billionaires, while others rioted asking Jagex to do a rollback. This is the infamous climbing boot update. See, back then, among PKers, climbing boots were extremely popular because they had the same strength bonus as rune boots, but they only costed 12 GP each. Jagex decided that this had to be changed. They were too cheap for the stats that they provided, and so they made their alch price 45k and the market price, that is the cost to buy them in the shop, 75k. The problem was that because this was a common PK item, many people had thousands of them stockpiled, and overnight they were now billionaires. Many players were upset with this change. They saw it as extremely unfair. And so once again, because of the precedents set by previous riots, they gathered at Falador Square in World 66 to try and incite change. But Jagex defended the update. They didn't do a rollback like many of the players were asking for, but there was one important factor that played into this riot, and it's ultimately what made it the last classic riot. For the first time, social media was being used in a large way to express negative sentiment towards Jagex. That is, the riot no longer existed within the RuneScape forums or within Falador Square. In this instance, it had spread to YouTube. Check it out, a popular RuneScape YouTuber known as log.zip had made a rant video about the climbing boot update. This put a ton of fuel on the fire. And from this point forward, social media's presence would forever change not only how riots were formed, but also how riots took place. Now, numerous other videos popped up after this, but Jagex ended up publicly denying the allegations that this was an inside job. They said that videos saying people knew about the update before it went live were faked, and that nobody had the thousands of climbing boots as many were claiming and sharing screenshots of. This statement was not widely believed, but it showed Jagex would not revert the change, and over the coming days the riot would slowly die down. So that's it for classic riots. In the next episode we'll be exploring some of the modern riots. So if you enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button, or if you're watching in the distant future, you can check out the playlist in the description below. I'll see you guys in the next one.